Bom dia a todos e todas. Hoje estamos iniciando as atividades. Hoje é o nosso quinto e último dia da Semana Internacional 2023, com o tema O Mundo na Ponta da Língua. Lembrando, esse evento ele foi todo online, mas ele está gravado no YouTube do CEFET-MG. Eu convido para estar conosco Liz Ging, que é a nossa parceira, junto com a Embaixada dos Estados Unidos, que é um programa de fellow, e ela está conosco durante esse ano todo de 2023 e conseguimos renovar o contrato, estará conosco em 2024 também. Então, good morning, Liz. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. Liz fala muito bem português, fala espanhol também, não sei se outras línguas, além do inglês dela, claro. E eu vou fazer uma pequena apresentação. A Liz is a language educator from Boston, Massachusetts, with 15 years of experience working in community education, language institute, and higher education settings. She currently works at CEFET-MG through the English Language Fellow Program, a partnership with the U.S. Embassy in Brazil. She earned an MA in Applied Linguistics from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a specialization in foreign language pedagogy and a BFA in 3D Fine Arts from the Massachusetts College of Art. Her experience with language teacher education has included projects with the Universidade de Caxias do Sul and the Universidade Federal do Pampa, among other institutions. Her areas of interest include the role of emotion in language learning, teaching cognition, and teacher education preparation. Thanks a lot, Liz, for accepting to be with us at Semana Internacional. And I would tell you that last Wednesday, at the same time, Liz gave us a very nice thought, highlights some conversation tips, formal and informal conversation. And it was very, very nice. It is recorded, and I recommend to you to listen it. Today, Liz is going to talk about culture focus, braiding community, identity, and history, regional arts and craft traditions in the U.S. The word is with you, Liz.
All right. So thank you, Christina, for the very kind introduction. And thanks again for the invitation to participate in the Semana Internacional. I do appreciate it. And I hope everyone will enjoy this topic about traditional folk arts, crafts, and artisan traditions in the United States. So I just wanted to explain briefly for everyone before I start my presentation with my images and all of this, why did I pick this topic? Because I did get a great deal of flexibility in choosing a topic for this presentation. And I feel like learning about the art traditions of a country that you're interested in, or a country where the language you're interested in is spoken, learning about those things can be such a really fascinating and really rich experience. It can bring you into contact with historical knowledge, cultural information, and things that you might not encounter otherwise. Also, on a personal note, I'm also an artist. I don't do art as a professional job, but I do a lot of painting and watercolor. As Christina mentioned, I did my undergraduate degree in fine arts, actually, in the 3D area in textiles. So I have a great personal interest in this myself. As someone who enjoys making art and also enjoys, learning about that as well. So I partly chose the topic because of that. And I also chose this topic because I think it's something that's maybe less publicized about the United States. Um, of course, every country has things that are kind of iconic or emblematic or famous that people from other parts of the world associate with that country. And I think sometimes, traditional crafts and arts and artisan stories and culture is something that's not so well known about the US. And it's something that's like really important to me personally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to try to ask some questions to people who are in the chat. So if you're in the chat, hello, good morning, and get ready maybe to answer some questions about what you might know or what you might want to know about this topic. So additionally, this is a huge topic, you know, talking about the art traditions of a whole country is really impossible in any amount of time for any presentation, no matter how long it is. And I considered a lot of different ways of selecting topics for today. I thought, oh, maybe I should pick something to represent each region. Maybe I should pick things that represent different cultural groups or different time periods or different mediums, different art media like textiles, ceramics, woodworking, and manuscripts, and all this kind of stuff. And ultimately, what I decided is after going through many different choices, I picked things that I really love. So I hope that will be interesting for you. And I'm going to go into just a moment a little bit of an agenda to preview for you what we're going to talk about. So just give me one moment. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Hold on. One second. Okay. So we have our topic, culture, identity, community. And as far as the agenda, we have had our welcome and our introduction. I picked 3 topics that we're going to look at specifically today. So one of them is hex signs, which I will explain in case anyone doesn't know what that is. Quilting, which actually we have a picture of over here on the right. And also wampum, which I will also explain in case anyone doesn't know what that is. It's a little bit less famous maybe than quilting. Essentially, I picked 3 different media. So hex signs is a kind of folk art painting. Quilting is a textile art, and wampum is related to jewelry and the production of jewelry using different natural materials. So that's the plan. We have 3 topics. And as I said before, at any point, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I have the chat open on my phone over here. So I will try to keep an eye on that. And yeah, if people have questions there, I'll do my best to answer them. Yes, so we're going to start with this topic here, hex signs. And I'm curious, just looking at this image with all these different designs, does anyone recognize these images? Have you seen them before? Do they look familiar at all to you? And maybe from another art style as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be the specific community I'm talking about. So one person said they don't recognize them. Oh, hello, Nicole. Good morning. Um, and Clara made a really interesting comment. She said they look like mandalas. Exactly. And this kind of format of a mandala, these geometric designs that often have different color symbolism, geometric symbolism, are prevalent in many different cultures and artistic traditions. And hex signs are very, very similar in format to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about where these paintings come from, what they're about, what is the design, what is the style, a little bit about the history and the significance of them. So, hex signs is the name of these paintings as a form of folk art painting, originating from an art form called Fraktur. I don't speak German, so anyone who speaks German, feel free to correct my pronunciation here. This is a German word. But this was an art style that was very popular in the 1800s, this original style here. And it still persists to the present day, but the older examples are more famous. Um, and these paintings were typically folk art paintings that were used for manuscripts. So texts like this example here, which I think is some kind of a certificate, either a birth certificate or a marriage certificate, something like this. So they were very typical on official documents like this. Also, they were very typical on church documents, like baptismal certificates, for example. And there's a lot of these very stylized birds, plant forms, stars and suns and moons and things like this, hearts. And this art style you can also see on furniture. For example, this wooden chest up here. You can see the style is a bit similar. It's different because it's a different medium on painting on wood, but the design style is similar. So this style, Fraktur, it's a highly decorative illuminated manuscript, this one here, of the Pennsylvania Dutch community. Who are the Pennsylvania Dutch community? So question for people here. I have highlighted on the map the bright blue state is Pennsylvania. What do you know about Pennsylvania? Do you know anything about Pennsylvania? Please write in the chat. What do you know about Pennsylvania? And then I will tell you some things. Okay. I see a few other people are in the chat. Talis is here. Hello. Who else is here? Danielle, good morning. Junia is here. Good morning, Junia. Someone said, I know very little. That's totally fine. We're going to talk about it. Anybody else? I'll give it a moment. Okay. All right. Well, if you think of anything else, feel free to write it in the chat for us. But the little bit of information I'm going to share with you about Pennsylvania is it is this state year. So it's kind of in between the mid-Atlantic region here of the US, where you have, Washington, D.C., Delaware, Maryland, the Northeast, which is up here, where you have New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, okay, and the Midwest, which is the region over here into the center of the country. So Pennsylvania is right in the middle of these different regions. And the Pennsylvania Dutch community is actually not just in Pennsylvania, but also in other states like Ohio and Indiana. And it's a community of people that have German ancestry. So their family background originally is from Germany. And many of those people maintained a really strong connection to their family's culture of origin. So many of the people in that region still speak a particular variety of German that was common at the time of immigration, when people immigrated to that area. And also a lot of the art forms have been preserved and maintained in that community. And also on kind of a another unrelated note, very famous for like very interesting food and different culinary traditions, very influenced by German food. But anyhow, that's a little bit about the region. So we're talking about this area kind of between the Midwest, the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the South. So this region right here. So moving along, these are some other examples of those Fraktur style paintings. And you can see they often have this illuminated text with a very ornate, elaborate writing style. That's very typical of them, calligraphic writing style in cursive. And then also a lot of the motifs are very, very recurrent. Things like the pair of birds, the plant forms, geometric shapes that could be flowers, they could be something else here. Looks like we have maybe an angel. I'm not certain. I think it might be an angel at the top here. And this is another example here of another certificate of some type. Again, with the angels, with the birds, with the flowers, you get the feeling for this style. It's a folk style of painting. And just to be really clear, guys, when I use this terminology, folk or folk art, there's a lot of different meanings. I mean, folk just refers to being of the people. And when you talk about art, typically folk art, it means someone who's not professionally trained as an artist, but someone who does an art or a craft of their own, usually self-taught or taught by people in their family, their friends, or their community. So that's what I'm going to be referring to with a lot of these art styles and things we're going to look at. So hex signs, we're transitioning from those paintings, which were on paper, to hex signs, which are part of an architectural tradition, actually. They were used on the exterior of buildings. They began as barn paintings. So we have some examples of barns here, 2 of them. The barn is, in case anyone is not sure, it's the building for the animals to live in, right? So barn paintings were one of the first places these symbols started appearing, and also as plaques for the blessing of houses. So when a house was built, often a small plaque like this would be put into the foundation of the house. And it was to commemorate the building of the house, to bless the home, and to give good wishes and kind of fortune to the people who would be living in that home. So these were 2 of the first places these symbols appeared. You can see this one, it's, I think, ceramic. It's a different material. These ones are painted on wood. It's really beautiful. I love this black and white photo here with these really cool different designs. And additionally, the original designs were quite simple. They were often of this type with a star in a circle. This was the most common, and you see it in the house plaque as well, the star within the circle. And over time, the designs became more elaborate, more diversified. There started to be the incorporation of different symbols and so forth. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But you also have this question that comes up when you read about this topic, but also if you just ask people about it, because these hex signs are pretty well known in the US, I would say. They're very popular decoration items, honestly, for people's garden and the outside of your house. My family has one on the shed in the back of their house. I have a picture of that I will show you in a few minutes. So even outside of the area where this originates from, they're very, very popular as an art form and as a beautiful decorative art. However, there's often the question of whether the designs are symbolic or purely decorative. I think that's a very hard question to answer. I am not an art historian. I did read a bit more about it for this presentation, and it seems that there's quite a bit of disagreement about this. Some people say the designs are beautiful decorations influenced by German folk art, and some people say the designs are symbolic, they have different meanings, and they're sort of a talisman that they're supposed to offer you good fortune or prosperity or a happy relationship or things like this. And I think because this art form is so dispersed now and modern artists are interpreting this form in their own way, there's a lot of different interpretations of what these images mean. So I got an older image for us. This is a vintage advertisement for Pennsylvania Dutch hex signs. And I can tell you, actually, as a child, I visited this area with my family, and I remember seeing things like this when we were visiting this region. So it's still very common, even though this is an old advertisement. It looks like, I don't know, to me, the style it looks like from maybe the 70s or the 80s. But anyway, it says painted in the heart of the Pennsylvania Dutch country, which is in Pennsylvania and that region, okay? And you can see the advertising, how they're presenting it, yeah? It says, need rain for crops? Been having bad luck lately? Have a love or romance problem? Or just want to fancy up your home? So they're serving both kind of interpretations, that it has a symbolic meaning, and also that some people just think they're beautiful and are not so invested in the significance of the symbolism. And like I said, this is an advertisement, so this is not the ultimate authority on the meaning of these, but I think these are pretty common interpretations. They're similar to things I've heard many people say over the years. So you have really small representations of some of the most typical designs. And I'm going to mention a couple of them here. So this one, double Distelfink, again, German, I'm not sure how to pronounce this word, but it's a bird. It's a finch. It's like a small yellow bird. That's very common in that part of North America, really. And the double bird here is double good luck. So it's a blessing for good luck. You have oak, which is a leaf from a certain tree, which is a symbol of strength. Stars representing good luck. Unicorns representing virtue, piety. A lot of other images. The animal images are often to protect livestock. So if you have horses or cows or sheep or whatever animals, people would hang these in the barn or in the area where the animals corral is. The marriage sign, rose petals, the morning star. So you can see there's a lot of different symbols here. Interestingly, there's also the Irish hex. This is not an Irish tradition, and they're calling it a Dutch-Irish good luck sign. So I don't know all the history behind that, but I will tell you this is the one that my family always had hanging at our house, and my parents. And my father's family is of Irish origin originally. And this symbol is actually really common in Massachusetts, which is a part of the US where there's a lot of Irish ancestry. So just kind of an interesting fusion there. So let's look at a little bit more information, guys. Here we have two kind of enlarged designs to show a little bit more in more detail about the symbols. So this one here is the Irish Dutch one that I mentioned before, and the double birds is good luck. The clover is also good luck. It's curious to me that this is a 3-leaf clover and not a 4-leaf clover, but maybe someday I'll find the answer to that. I don't know totally the history behind why they use the 3-leaf, because usually 4 is good luck. But anyway, we have also the heart. The heart is often it's a religious symbol. It's a symbol for the presence of God or the source of love. Again, the Pennsylvania Dutch community is primarily of German ancestry, so mostly of Christian origin. And so a lot of the designs are related to Christian iconography. You have someone painting one down here. I think this was from a class or a workshop that I found some pictures of. You have this tulip here, which of course is associated with, certain kinds of folk art in different parts of Europe. But the 3 petals is symbolizing the Trinity. So it's another Christian symbol of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You have this heart again, and you have this rosette shape in the middle, which is sometimes labeled as a symbol of good luck, sometimes labeled as a symbol of love. There's a lot of different explanations you can find for that. You have a larger rosette up here, And interestingly, this one, it has 12 petals along the outer edge, and the 12 petals, it explains it here, but symbolize good luck for the 12 months of the year. So I thought that was kind of interesting. People, I'm gonna move on, hold on. Oh, before before we go to the next topic, do you guys have any questions or any comments about any of these designs or about the history? I don't know a lot about the history, but I know a little bit that I can share with you. I know a few people commented in the chat. Danielle said you think they're beautiful. Yeah, I think they're beautiful too. And I think it's interesting because it's something that's very present in kind of daily life in a lot of parts of the US, and something people don't necessarily remark on or talk about or say, what does that mean? Because they're so common. And often, as I said, as a purely decorative thing for many people, um, that they're not often kind of discussed or remarked upon. Um, but in any case, I think they're really beautiful too. And Thales said, you said your family's house had it. Oh, and do I have it too? You know what, Thales, this is a really good question because as I was researching this topic for this presentation, I found the picture of the Irish Dutch hex, and for as long as I can remember, my family's home had one of these in it. And I was thinking to myself, oh, I don't have one of those. So I think I'm going to have to find a way to do that because I think it's really beautiful, and it does remind me of my home and, you know, my family and where I grew up. So I'm going to have to find a way to do that. Um, oh, guys, one other little detail that I forgot to mention is that many of the hexes also have a snake. I don't know if you noticed the little snake here in the flower at the bottom. And the snake is a symbol of temptation, which is so interesting because these hexes are often full of positive symbolism of good luck and prosperity and abundance and a happy marriage or safety for your animals or all this kind of stuff. But there is, you know, some of this other religious symbolism about, you know, virtue and piety and the necessity of being aware of temptation, which I didn't know, to be honest, until I researched this. I never knew what the snake meant. So, kind of interesting, all of the different cultural layers and things that are present in that. So, guys, I'm going to move along to our next topic, which is about quilting. Let's see, there's actually a comment in the chat. And Clara said, is there a difference between the painted signs and those made with other techniques? I think that's a really good question. You said those, you know, is it possible to make on wood? Yeah, and you do see folk art, you know, furniture and boxes and chests and decorative things as well, made with wood and other materials, incorporating some of these designs. And there's a similarity to some of the designs. There's also differences. I think a lot of the differences have to do with the medium that you're working in. And actually, I think I can show you guys a good example of this when we talk about the textiles, because there's a lot of textiles produced in that region of the United States that use a similar iconography, like the rosette and the tulips, and these kind of shapes are also very popular in quilting designs. Now, they take a different form, and I would say a lot of that is because of the medium. You know, like with painting, you have a certain more flexibility of creating the design than you do, for example, with sewing, you know, because of the constraints of working with fabric and thread. But I'll see if I can point out some of those examples when we look at the textiles. Um, and Danielle said, Liz, do you think they have some magic power? I mean, yeah, they seem to be not just drawings. Yeah, this is the attraction, I think, because a lot of people believe that they do bring good luck. They were used to bless people's homes, bless your, you know, your barn if you have a farm, if you have animals. Um, and they incorporate a lot of very evocative symbols I think, that speak to people regardless of whether you're culturally familiar with the background of these images or not. I think the mandala kind of format is a big part of that. It's very, it speaks, I think. You know, the art really speaks, and it draws people in. And I mean, personally, I don't know. I think it's interesting. And I think, how can I say this? I think art, like bringing art into the space where you live or your home or where you work even, it brings a certain kind of positive and very beautiful energy sometimes. And I think, we could call that having some kind of magical power, but I think people have different beliefs about that. So let's look at the quilting, guys, because there's some interesting similarities and differences. So quilting is next. We're going to talk about a textile topic. And question for you guys in the chat. Does anybody here recognize this word quilting? Have you heard it before? Do you know what it is? Do you recognize what activity the women in the picture are doing? Have you done this before? Maybe. We'll see what people say in the chat. Right. Okay. All right. So Clara made a comment and she said, I've heard it before, but I don't know the translation for it in Portuguese. That's interesting. And you said it looks like, hold on, the patchwork people do here. Yeah, quilting is a name for making blankets with a patchwork style. So very similar. Tales said, yes, one of my father's sisters does it. She made one for every person in my family at some point. Yeah, I love to hear a story like that. Quilting is often something that I think has a lot of family connections. People make them as gifts for family, for friends. In the US, this is very common as well. So yeah, guys, feel free to continue to leave any thoughts you have about quilts. I'm going to move on to a little basic info about it for anyone who doesn't know what a quilt is. It is a textile art. Quilting is producing a large blanket from separate fabric pieces, a patchwork, as Clara said, and 3 layers are joined. So you have 3 pieces for a quilt. You have, in this picture, the top here. You have something soft in the middle that's going to give you a nice feeling and some insulation and make it warm. You often cotton. I mean, now people often use polyester, but there's different kinds of fillings. And then you have a backing. And then quilting is the process of joining those 3 layers by sewing. And then the production is a quilt. And someone commented in the chat, I don't know, but I think it looks like a blanket. Yes, you're totally right. It is a type of special blanket. And of course, quilting is not unique to the United States, as you guys have mentioned already. People do patchwork, for example, in Brazil. People do patchwork in many parts of the world. And in the United States, a lot of the techniques and designs come from European traditions. Often that's because they started to be done in areas where there was a lot of immigration from Western Europe and Eastern Europe as well, but especially quilting traditions from Britain and from France. So this is something common all over the United States, I would say. It's not limited to a specific region. I used to do quilting. I'm not doing it right now, but I used to love that, and I think it's so fun. And historically, something important is that quilts were made from scraps of leftover fabrics. So, old clothing or things that were used and, maybe not possible to continue their original use, but some of the fabric is still good, and it would be salvaged and used to produce a quilt by cutting it up and creating a design. And quilting can be done individually or communally. And when it's done communally, the event is called a quilting bee, and it's like a party to make a quilt. Excuse me. And I have some pictures of that to share with you. Quilting can be done by hand or by machine or with a combination of both. Of course, historically, it was done by hand. Now people do both and they combine as well. You have someone here, just stitching, and then here you have some images of typical stitches that are used in the production of a quilt. And finally, it's possible to make designs when you're quilting through a variety of different things. So it can be the piecing of the fabric, how you cut and arrange the fabrics can create your design. The stitches that you use to sew through all the layers is also often used very artistically to create images and designs. And then also people sometimes incorporate embroidery and applique. Um, so I have some pictures here of people quilting together. Some are contemporary images, some are historical images. This is an older image, obviously. And these are more contemporary images of women at quilting bees working on a quilt together. And you can see, I think maybe best in this large photo, that there's kind of a frame that they put the layers into, and then people sew through, and then they move the quilt on the frame, and slowly they sew through all the layers. Um, there's a few more comments in the chat. Someone said it looks cozy. Yes. And Clara, you said your mother and your aunt used to make blankets together with crochet squares. And this is similar in a way, people making individual pieces and then joining it to create a whole blanket in this case. So similar to that in a way. Additionally, just for anyone who might not be familiar with some of the textile techniques I mentioned, embroidery is this here, where you use the thread and the sewing here to create images. So this is very typical as in kind of an accent, a special detail on a quilt. People often also use embroidery to put a message on the quilt. A lot of the time it's on the back or on the border of the quilt. Sometimes people will sign their name if they're making it as a gift for someone else. And then applique is creating images using cut pieces of fabric that are applied on top of the quilt surface. And I think you can see here also how they use the stitching, the sewing itself to create a textured design as well. So these are some of the techniques that are used in addition to the basic sewing. Now, as far as the examples I'm going to show you, as I said, quilting is popular all over the United States, I would say. But we're going to look at 3 specific quilt traditions: Amish quilts, Hawaiian quilts, and the quilts of Gee's Bend. So Amish quilts are from the Pennsylvania area, similar to the hex signs. Hawaiian quilts are obviously from Hawaii, and the quilts of Gee's Bend are from a community called Gee's Bend, which is in Alabama in the south of the United States. So we're also going to look at a few other styles, but I'll talk about that after. Amish quilts. These are related to the Pennsylvania Dutch community, but the Amish are a specific religious group from that area. They're a more conservative Protestant religious group that also has German ancestry and have preserved a lot of the craft traditions throughout history since they immigrated to the United States. And a lot of the Amish quilts are in these darker colors, kind of more subdued colors, because traditionally the Amish do not wear bright colored clothing. They wear more subtle colors. So that's represented in these quilts because traditionally they were made with old clothing. So it represents the colors that are typically worn in these communities. You also have, this is a picture of some Amish women wearing that kind of, as I said, more traditional dress, more conservative. Some of the Amish communities, they also wear these head coverings, the women do. And they're having a quilting bee and creating a quilt together. These are some of the other designs, these kind of medallion stars. This one is typical for a wedding quilt. It's called double wedding rings here. And then these very geometric designs with squares. But the designs can be created with squares, with triangles, with diamond shapes. There's a lot of possibilities. So that's a very brief talk about Amish quilts, guys. Hawaiian quilts, very different. So let's just contrast. Very different. The quilting tradition in Hawaii is something that arose from traditional art forms and the importation of foreign materials. So cotton is not a material that is native to the Hawaiian Islands. So cotton cloth was not a traditional material for clothing or bedding there. However, once through a lot of complicated historical processes, Hawaii was connected to other communities in the mainland United States. Um, Different foreign materials were imported, and cotton fabric was one of those, and quilting really took off and became very popular. There were previous traditions of making bedding from local indigenous materials, which are quite different but incorporate a lot of similar designs. So as you can see, the Hawaiian quilt's very different. A lot of geometric designs. Again, kind of this mandala-like format is very popular, and it incorporates a lot of botanical imagery from the native flora of the Hawaiian Islands. And, you know, traditionally they're used for bedding. You have one here with pineapples. You can sometimes have different fruits. I think this is a breadfruit, this is a pineapple. And then two different women in front of the palace in one of the main Hawaiian islands with their quilts. And so you can see bold colors, different color scheme. This two-tone is very typical, especially red and white is very popular, but you do see multicolor designs as well. So this is a little tiny sample about Hawaiian quilts. And then the quilts of Gee's Bend. So this is a tradition from the south of the United States. And Gee's Bend, as I said, is a community in Alabama. It is a predominantly African American or Black American community. And it was, historically very isolated. It was a very rural area, and this unique quilt style emerged in this area. So you can see it's very interesting because this example is from the early 20th century, but it's very contemporary looking. And this is something people often remarked about these quilts, that they looked really, really modern, but they were made many at the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, this tradition continues until today. These are modern images from the last 10 or 20 years. Yeah, this style emerged kind of before this kind of geometric contemporary style came into the larger art world. It was very typical in this area. And the story about the community of Gee's Bend and the quilting tradition there is really fascinating. I encourage you to look into it if you're curious. I picked a few other examples. I think this one is so beautiful, so interesting, like very vibrant, and the colors and the juxtaposition of the shapes is so cool. I just think it's really beautiful. And again, very geometric, but very different from the Amish quilts, which are also very geometric. There's a question in the chat from Beatrice. She said, is it usual for people in the US to have contact with this type of art in primary school, like in art classes? I would say yes, Beatrice. I think it's something that often you learn about maybe when you're a kid, right? When you're in elementary school, you look at examples of things like this, and then you do some adapted activity. For kids, it's a little bit simpler. And actually, I have a picture of that coming up. But it is common to be introduced to this, I would say. Of course, it depends on your school, it depends on your teachers, but I think it is common. I know in elementary school, I did see some of this. Not all of it, but some of it. So I wanted to also show a few styles. These are not related to any particular region, but crazy quilts, this is a style, it's called crazy, because it's a very, I would say, frenetic design, very like high energy, lots of very small pieces. This style originated in the Victorian era, again, using small pieces, often of very expensive fabrics, to make use of whatever was left of those small pieces of silk or velvet or linen, expensive fibers. And often the designs were very Yeah, very, very energetic. But it's interesting, you can see the squares, you know. In here, you can see, if you start to look, you can see the squares that were used to construct the quilt. And here you see someone working with the squares. And you have a very irregular design, but they're constructed in geometric blocks usually. So these are crazy quilts, which are still popular to make today. Album quilts are a little bit more, these are more historical examples. This is a style that people still make today, where each block of the quilt has a different design. And sometimes in the past, this was done for a woman to demonstrate her sewing abilities and skills, maybe for like a potential, marriage, that she had the skills and abilities to create things for the home. But also, they were often produced by groups of people where every person would make one piece. And that's a very common way of making an album quilt as well. And in that case, it's called a friendship quilt. And the friendship quilt, I think it's self-explanatory. A group of friends, each person makes one or more of the blocks, and then you connect everything together. And it's usually created as a gift. Um, So here, I included this image on the top because I think this is a children's one. It's common for kids to learn to sew in some art classes in school when they're young. Not all schools do this. But you can see this is much simpler, much more basic kind of design. But I believe this was created by kids in an art class. And I learned to do that when I was a kid as well. So it's pretty cool, I think. You also have an example here of how friendship quilts often incorporate text. They incorporate messages which are embroidered or written. Sometimes people write, with fabric paint now, or with a certain, like a permanent ink. But historically, it was often embroidered with thread. Um, a message or a poem or a dedication, very typical. And this is another friendship quilt here with the names of all the people in the middle of the stars. Yeah. So finally, we're going to talk a little bit about wampum. Before we do that, I'm just going to look at the chat. And yeah, oh, Danielle, you said at the hippie fair in Belo Horizonte, there's people selling handmade things. I have really liked that, guys. I love to see crafts and, textiles. I love crochet as well. We're not talking about crochet today, but I love that. Um, yeah, quilting, other kinds of handmade things, I think is just, so many stories that you can learn about through that. So wampum, has anyone heard of this before? Anybody? Do you recognize the word, or do you recognize anything in this image? Like, what is the woman holding here? What is this person holding? You can put in the chat any thoughts that you might have about that, or questions. Okay. And I'm also going to explain what it is. Okay. Let's see. And there's another comment I didn't respond to before. Christina said, I love to do some handwork like ceramic and crochet. I think that's awesome. I think ceramic is something I've never really done, and I've often considered taking a class or learning how to do that. I think that's so cool. And crochet is really fun. I think it's really relaxing, and knitting as well. So a few people commented, I don't know what wampum is. So I'll tell you guys. Wampum is a traditional type of a bead. So these pieces here that make up this belt, it's a belt. Wampum are the beads. And wampum is a traditional shell bead that is made from this shell, which is called a quahog shell. It's a special type of a clam that's purple and white. And it's really only found, from what I understand, in the eastern Atlantic northeast region of the United States and Canada. You can find these shells. They're very common to find. They're not unusual. And quahogs you can eat as well. I mean, the seafood, you can bake them and eat them. But anyhow, guys, the shells, prior to the colonial period, were used to create beads by many of the different indigenous groups that lived in this part of North America. So this map, you have the U.S. and Canada, modern day Canada and U.S., and you have listed many of the different indigenous groups here. And I would say wampum is most associated with the different tribal groups that live in the coastal area, but historically it was traded and used all across this region of the United States and Canada, modern day US and Canada. And you can see as well here, they also list some of the language families are here. And just on a personal note, part of the reason why I chose this is because this was something that was produced and is still created by modern day artists in the state where I'm from. So in Massachusetts, I am from Massachusetts. Interestingly, you notice the word Massachusetts is on the map, and that's because Massachusetts is the name of one of the traditional tribal groups, which is the origin of the state name, Massachusetts. And you also have other groups here like the Nauset, the Wampanoag, the Narragansett. These are all tribal groups, indigenous groups. And many of these groups are still, present in that area. There are some of the smaller tribal groups are not present at this time. But definitely the Wampanoag has a very strong community in Massachusetts, the Nauset, the Narragansett, very well known. And these groups do still produce art using these kind of beads. So these beads during the colonial era, they were used prior to the colonial era, and during the colonial era, they were used to create belts, like the picture here. Okay, the first picture. And they were belts that recorded historical events and stories through symbolic images. They were also used as ceremonial gifts, often between different tribal groups. And they were also used to commemorate treaties, so agreements between the European colonists and the indigenous communities about where different people were living, what territory would be used by what people. Often those kind of agreements were commemorated with the production of a wampum belt like this. And the word wampum comes from an indigenous word from the Massachusetts or Narragansett languages. Wampumpag. I don't speak this language, so I'm not sure if my pronunciation is on point here. But it's a word that means string of white beads. So of course you do have wampum that is only white, and you do have wampum that is only purple, and that's a mix of the two colors. And it's just such a striking and beautiful color, I think. And it's important to say that in the present day, people do continue to create the historical forms of wampum belts, people who are from different indigenous groups, different indigenous communities, and people also who live in the same area as those artists produce the beads, and the artisans produce the belts and other traditional items. And also artists have taken the material, especially artists in indigenous communities, and created new forms, contemporary styles of jewelry and their own creations, basically. So again, you have a picture here of the shell, the bead, and some very simple jewelry produced with that. And something important to note, guys, is that historically, these beads, before contact with the European settlers, the indigenous communities who produced these beads produced them using stone tools before certain metals were introduced that were used for working with the shells. They were produced in a very laborious and a very, very complex process using stone tools. And then after the introduction of different kinds of metal and metal tools, that did facilitate the production of these materials and the beads in a different way. And that technology was taken up by the indigenous groups in the production of these materials as well. This is some contemporary wampum jewelry, so quite different looking. It incorporates other materials. You can see things like pendants and earrings. It's very common to find things like this in, artisan and art jewelry stores in regions where these kind of beads are produced. Again, these are some older, more traditional kind of styles. These here are reproductions of historical styles. So these are modern day creations, but producing older styles of wampum belts. These are historical photographs of actual wampum belts that commemorated different treaties between different Native American groups and different groups of, I believe, Dutch settlers in the New York area. So, those pictures, yeah, it serves its purpose, guys. These are some pictures of contemporary production of traditional styles. You have someone working with the beads here, and then you have some different designs. You can see, some of the images, it's kind of clear to see there's people, there are birds, there are keys, different kinds of, I think there's a building over here. And then also, like I said, artists who use this material in the contemporary art scene also produce their own styles. So you have some earrings here, a pendant combined with like glass beads and other materials, which is not traditional, but very popular to do now. And then things like bracelets, and then a Wampanoag artist here working on a belt. So it's just an interesting material, I think, because it incorporates so many different historical and cultural pieces of information, and connections into one object. So I have included a whole list of references related to some of these things, guys. This is just a list of links, but there's things about hexes, about quilts, about Hawaiian art, about Gee's Bend. There's links to art exhibits, some news articles about different initiatives in the production of wampum and wampum jewelry and art in New England. And yeah, let's see. And also a few things from Canada, because in Canada they do produce wampum still as well. So you have a few things connecting that here. However, guys, I am gonna close my screen. Hold on. 1 second. Okay. And this presentation is going to be shared in the description for people. So if you want to look at those links, if you want to research any of this, I really encourage you to check it out. And if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Let's see. This is a question from Junia. She said, did Indigenous culture have an influence on the formation of the American people? I mean, of course. Absolutely. And this is a question, guys, I can't answer in 3 minutes. But of course, yes. I mean, and to the present day, right? I think this is something that's important to mention, that, of course, I showed some historical images that were older, right? To give historical context. But of course, there are many parts of the US where there is a huge indigenous population to this day, especially in the Southwest of the United States, where there are a lot of reservations, which are self-governing communities of different indigenous groups. But also in other parts of the US where it's not as well known. For example, like I'm from Massachusetts, the Wampanoag tribe is very present to this day. They're doing a revitalization project of the Wampanoag language in Massachusetts state right now to provide resources and materials to expand the presence of that language in the Massachusetts area, which I think is amazing. And also there's a lot of support for bringing back different traditional music, art forms, and of course providing appropriate support to those communities as well, because they were historically so marginalized in so many ways. So really fascinating, to check out. Are there any other questions, guys, in the chat? Or Christina, do you have any thoughts, questions, comments?
Yes, for sure. I have some comments. Very nice, very nice. So interesting US culture art, craft, simples, and for your process explanation. They are very rich process and historical ones, and this is very nice for us to recognize that and their influence in nowadays. And I love to do some handworks like ceramics and crochet. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
That's
I love
cool.
it. Yeah, so
Very
I
nice.
love to see the figures and all the art samples. And I would love to have a contemporary one-pull ring or earrings. I will
It's
look
so
for it.
beautiful. It's so
Yes,
beautiful.
so
Yeah.
beautiful, so
It's such a
beautiful.
striking color. That purple color is so eye-catching, you know.
Yes, very, very nice. I'm not sure if we have another question. No, just a comment. Danielle said, very interesting, Liz. Thanks for sharing a bit of your country art. Very
You're most
nice.
welcome.
Yeah.
Most welcome. Yeah.
So I'd love to thank you again for accepting to be at Semana Internacional 2023. The word on the tip of the tongue, and now the word on our hands too.
Yes.
Very, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you again for the invitation, guys. Check out the links and info if you're interested. And yeah, there's a whole
yeah,
world of things to discover in that area. So check it
yeah.
out.
Besides being a very good teacher, Liz is a very kind person, and she also has a very deep artistic knowledge. We need to, to profit of this knowledge.
It's just
Thank
something that's so beautiful, you know, and so much to
Yeah,
learn from. Mhm.
yeah. Art is something in our life. It's a kind of
Mhm.
the soul of living. I don't know how to
Absolutely.
describe that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Então, essa tarde nós teremos a apresentação dos trabalhos dos alunos da República Dominicana, que estão conosco há 3 semanas, e hoje, finalizando, eles vão fazer o trabalho O Brasil que Conheci, e vão apresentar durante a tarde no CEFET, e no final da tarde, às 17 horas, teremos uma oficina de merengue e bachata. Então, eu aproveito para convidar a todos. Liz, será um prazer se você estiver conosco, que eu sei do seu interesse também por pelo folclore, pela dança, né? Acho que será muito legal. E no início da tarde, nós teremos uma conversa com a cônsul do Japão, que vai falar para nós um pouco dos festivais sazonais do Japão. E eu gostaria de agradecer novamente a diretoria-geral do CEFET, que sempre nos apoia e nos dá condições de fazer as atividades que oferecemos para a nossa comunidade. Também a Secretaria de Comunicação, que na pessoa da Clara, que está nos bastidores aí junto com a gente, ela e Júlio dividindo. E se não tiver mais nenhum comentário, Li, se você quiser falar mais alguma coisa.
Só obrigado, todo mundo. Obrigada.
Então, now we really got to go. It's time.
Right. Have a nice day, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liz, again.